It began with the quiet tension that often precedes high-stakes diplomacy. A large meeting room in Hallandale Beach, Florida, filled with the unmistakable sense that history might be inching forward, or perhaps merely circling the same uneasy ground. Ukrainian negotiators, led by Defense Minister Rustem Umerov, entered the room with deliberate steps, mirroring the resolve of a nation that has endured nearly 4 years of the most devastating conflict on European soil since World War II. Across from them, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio settled into his seat, joined by senior American figures, including Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Together, they signaled the unmistakable message that Washington was prepared to push for a tangible diplomatic breakthrough, one that might finally open the door to an enduring resolution. Florida, far from the front lines, has become an unlikely host for a round of negotiations shaped by urgency, exhaustion, and the unmistakable pressure of global anticipation. The stakes extend well beyond ceasefire logistics. For Ukraine, the discussions represent far more than an attempt to end the fighting. They carry the weight of defining what kind of nation Ukraine will emerge as once the guns fall silent, sovereign, stable, and economically viable. For the United States, they speak to Washington's insistence that any agreement must safeguard Ukraine's long-term security while addressing the deeper geopolitical implications of Russia's war. As the delegation settled, Umerov was the first to speak publicly about the tone and substance of the talks. His calm delivery contrasted with the immense significance of his words. We were discussing about the future of Ukraine. We discussed all the important matters that are important for Ukraine, for Ukrainian people. And US was super supportive. We already had a successful meeting in Geneva, and today we continued this success. So at the moment, this meeting was productive and successful. On the later stages, hopefully, we'll keep you updated. The remarks struck a careful balance between optimism and caution. They also underscored a recurring theme. Ukraine sees these negotiations not as a momentary attempt to freeze the conflict, but as part of a longer arc of political and economic rebuilding. Umerov's insistence that the United States remains super supportive reveals not only diplomatic courtesy, but also a deliberate message to reassure Ukrainians that Washington is still committed to Kyiv's path. Behind the scenes, negotiators familiar with the process say the conversations in Florida are shaped by the momentum built earlier in Geneva, a meeting that reportedly helped establish a preliminary framework acceptable to both Kyiv and Washington. That meeting in Switzerland was characterized as successful, and today's round appears designed to preserve that trajectory. For Umerov, maintaining continuity is essential because any fracture in the process risks widening political divisions at home and emboldening the Kremlin. Across the table, Marco Rubio brought a different perspective, one defined by the political weight of representing the United States at a moment when American leadership is being scrutinized globally. Rubio's remarks signaled both encouragement and the sober recognition of how complex these discussions still are. As he put it, it's not just about the terms that ends fighting, it's about also the terms that set up Ukraine for long-term prosperity. I thought we started laying the groundwork for that most certainly in Geneva. I think we continued that work in our communications throughout the week. I think we've built on that again today, but there's more work to be done. This is delicate, it's complicated. There are a lot of moving parts. Those moving parts refer to more than just diplomatic language. They capture the extraordinarily difficult balancing act required to reconcile Ukrainian demands, American expectations, and Russian conditions. Any agreement must involve Moscow, and Rubio did not shy away from acknowledging this. He noted that negotiations will continue later in the week when Steve Witkoff travels to Moscow, a mission widely interpreted as an attempt to understand the boundaries of what the Kremlin might accept. At the same time, Rubio emphasized that Washington has already maintained dialogue with Russia at various informal levels, adding, and obviously there's another party involved here that will have to be a part of the equation, and that will continue later this week when Mr. Witkoff travels to Moscow. Although we've also been in touch in varying degrees with the Russian side, but we have a pretty good understanding of their views as well. The United States rarely acknowledges such communication publicly, and Rubio's statement is significant. It signals that Washington believes it understands, at least broadly, the contours of what Russia may be prepared to negotiate. Still, Rubio made clear that optimism must be tempered with realism. Much work remains, but today was again a very productive and useful session where I think additional progress was made. This admission is notable. It reveals that while progress exists, it is incremental, fragile, and subject to the unpredictability of a conflict that has reshaped global security arrangements. Inside the negotiation room, observers described an atmosphere that mixed cautious professionalism with underlying urgency. Representatives leaned over documents, compared notes, and exchanged long, technical conversations, aware that each point could alter the trajectory of the next phase of the war. Witkoff, the special envoy whose role has expanded steadily in recent months, sat close to Rubio, occasionally conferring in low tones. Kushner, whose presence has drawn both interest and criticism, maintained a quieter role but appeared closely engaged, often observing the Ukrainian delegation's reactions as discussions unfolded. For Ukraine, Umerov's role is central. As defense minister, he brings first-hand knowledge of the war's realities, the logistical strain, the casualties, the territorial vulnerabilities, and the immense civilian suffering. His participation signals that Ukraine intends to ensure any agreement aligns with battlefield realities rather than optimistic assumptions. Umerov is also acutely aware that Ukrainian society is divided over what compromises, if any, should be acceptable. Kyiv must therefore tread carefully, balancing its military situation with its political legitimacy. These negotiations occur against a backdrop of shifting dynamics. On the battlefield, Ukraine has faced immense pressure, with Russian forces consolidating gains in the east and continuing to press along multiple fronts. Kyiv's need for ammunition, air defences and long-range strike capability has become increasingly visible. Meanwhile, Russia is preparing for further offensives while simultaneously signalling, however ambiguously, that it may consider negotiations under conditions it deems favourable. Internationally, there is growing pressure to explore diplomatic pathways. European leaders, facing internal political fatigue and economic strain, have begun urging Washington and Kyiv to accelerate efforts toward a settlement. The United States, under a new foreign policy approach emphasizing negotiated outcomes, appears determined to guide both sides toward a framework that reduces long-term instability while avoiding concessions that would deeply undermine Ukraine's sovereignty. It is within this context that Rubio's emphasis on long-term prosperity becomes significant. Washington is not simply attempting to end the war, it is attempting to shape the post-war Ukrainian state. That includes commitments to reconstruction, security guarantees, and economic rehabilitation. Today's session in Florida was therefore not merely about the front line, ceasefire lines, or demilitarization zones. It was about Ukraine's long-term survival as a political and economic entity, and about ensuring that the end of the conflict does not become the beginning of another cycle of instability. The American delegation brings its own complexities. Witkoff's upcoming trip to Moscow, confirmed during these discussions, suggests that Washington is willing to engage with Russia through channels that allow for exploratory conversation without formal recognition of concessions. This type of shuttle diplomacy recalls earlier eras of high-stakes Cold War negotiation, where indirect exchanges often preceded official agreements. Kushner's participation adds a different dimension. Though he does not speak publicly about his role, insiders suggest he is helping build frameworks for economic recovery and post-war reconstruction areas in which he has extensive ties to global investment networks. If Ukraine is to achieve the long-term prosperity Rubio referenced, it will require billions in international financing, investor guarantees and industrial partnerships that go far beyond traditional diplomacy. Meanwhile, Ukraine continues to stress that any agreement must preserve its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Umerov's earlier remarks highlight the importance Kyiv places on maintaining unity and ensuring that the negotiations do not drift toward compromises that would fracture public support at home. His statement that all the important matters were discussed implies that Ukraine is trying to secure not only military terms, but broader political and humanitarian protections. As the talks unfolded, observers noted that both delegations appeared focused, serious, and deliberate. The handshake moments captured by cameras convey a sense of formality, but inside, the discussions were dense, technical, and often challenging. Both sides acknowledge that the complexity of the conflict requires patience, but patience has limits, especially for a nation undergoing continuous bombardment. Analysts note that the sequencing of negotiations, Geneva, Florida, and soon Moscow, appears intentional. Geneva helped frame the agenda. Florida is meant to deepen the dialogue. Moscow will test the viability of what has been drafted. This phased structure is reminiscent of classic diplomatic playbooks used in peace processes worldwide. Whether it will succeed remains uncertain. The war's human cost continues to rise, and military developments still influence political calculations. Yet the tone of the Florida meeting, productive and successful, as both Umerov and Rubio separately described, it offers a rare moment of cautious optimism. The fact that both sides publicly echoed the same keywords, productive, successful, and acknowledgement that there is still work to be done, suggests a deliberate message. Progress is real, but the road ahead is long. As the delegations eventually stood from the negotiating table, the day's significance extended beyond the closed doors. Each public statement, each careful phrase, and each acknowledgement of challenges forms part of a broader narrative. The world is watching, Ukraine is persevering, and the United States is actively shaping the next phase of diplomacy. Yet the most important question remains open. Will Moscow meaningfully engage? Rubio's remarks implied that Washington believes it understands Russian positions, but also that direct engagement is necessary. Witkoff's upcoming mission to Moscow may therefore become a defining moment. If Russia responds constructively, the Florida discussions could become the turning point that future historians reference as part of a chain leading to a negotiated settlement. If not, the war may continue grinding forward. For now, the meeting stands as another step in a long and difficult journey. A journey defined by the resilience of the Ukrainian people, the evolving role of American diplomacy, and the uncertain but necessary pursuit of peace. And as the Florida sun set outside the negotiation venue, the world waited for the next chapter to unfold, one shaped not by battlefield maneuvers, but by words exchanged around a table in a room where both hope and realism sit side by side.